Welcome, my name's James Boychuk and we're at the AP studio in Calgary, Alberta. This is the Alberta Printmakers facility. And today we're going to be looking at stone lithography. So lithography is can be broken into four basic parts. There's the preparation of the stone, which is the graining process. And then there's the drawing process, where you're establishing the image on the stone. And then there's a chemical process where you etch the image into the stone. And then finally you print the stone onto paper. So we're going to be going through some of those processes today, focusing mostly on the printing part of the process. So I guess we'll start with that. When we first take our stone out, there might be a previous drawing left on it, which we have to remove. This one is clear, but we're going to resurface the stone so that it's receptive to drawing. So if there's any type of grease or contamination on here, we'll remove that. And we'll start with quite a coarse carborundum grit and work our way up to a finer grit. So this is a wet sanding so that you don't end up with limestone in the atmosphere. And so we'll just get a nice amount of water, and then we'll add the carborundum grit. So this is 180 grit. You would usually start with a 100 grit. So this tool is a levigator, and we're just going to grind, fractions of millimeters off of the surface of the stone, again, so that we have a drawing surface prepared. So when we're doing this, we want to make sure to hit all of the areas of the stone evenly so that we don't end up with too much variability in terms of dimension. If there's a low spot, if we wear away one area too much, that creates a low spot, and when we put the stone through the press, it might not have enough pressure to transfer the ink adequately. So with a stone this size, sometimes you'll just grain it with a smaller stone on top of it, or you can do it with a levigator. Okay, so once the stone is prepared to be drawn upon, there's a number of tools that we can use. The most primary tools are grease pencils. So lithography is predicated on the principle that water and oil will repel each other. So we establish the drawing on the stone using these grease pencils, and by doing so we'll deposit grease into the grain of the stone. So because the stone is receptive to grease, I'll try and protect the surface of the stone from my hand, but I'll just come in and sort of layer pigment accordingly and build up my drawing that way. So there's a number of crayons that come in pencil form. There's these kinds of crayons that fit into a holder, and then you have a drawing tool that really is just a formed grease pencil or grease crayon. And they come in different shapes. This is a drawing tablet, and then this is what's called a rubbing crayon. So you would offset this onto a rag, and then you can create atmospheric types of drawing on the stone that way. Okay, so once the drawing is complete, we'll start the etching process. So we'll etch the stone with a nitric acid gum arabic solution. So where we've drawn on the stone with the greasy material, the stone will be protected from the etch, and where the stone is still open, the etch will affect those areas of the stone, making them more coarse and more receptive to water, more absorbent. And then when we go to print, we'll have some areas of the stone that are saturated with grease that will repel the water, and other areas of the stone that have been etched with this nitric acid solution and will be what they call hydrophilic. So water-loving, will absorb the water and will maintain what we call image area and non-image area according to that logic. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll rosin and talc the drawing. So the rosin and talc help to stabilize the drawing, as well as to pull the gum arabic solution down into the pores of the stone. So we'll start with that. So you want to wear a dust mask if you're doing this. Under normal circumstances. So I've mixed up 3 different strengths of etch. And that will correspond with the strength of the drawing. So areas that are heavily drawn will receive a stronger etch than areas that are very delicately drawn. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add some pure gum arabic. And then I'll add my etches in from weakest to strongest. So I'm just going to coat the whole surface with pure gum arabic. So I'll start with the weakest etch. So this one I can be fairly indiscriminate with, but I definitely want to hit my highlight areas. It won't hurt the shadow areas, the rich drawing, but I especially want to focus on the highlight areas of the drawing. And I want to apply the etch for about 1.5 minutes. So after the first etch has been applied, we'll add the second etch. So this is the etch that will be applied to the more medium parts of the drawing. Areas with medium tonality. So again, about 1.5 minutes with this medium etch. And then with our strongest etch, we're only going to apply this to the most heavily drawn parts of the image. And we're only going to apply this one for 30 seconds. Okay, so I have to be the most delicate with this etch. Okay, we've etched the stone. I'm just going to neutralize our etches with some pure gum arabic, and we'll buff the stone tight. So we'll apply at least 2 etches to the stone before printing. So I don't want to interrupt the drawing, so I'm not applying much pressure. And as I remove the excess gum arabic, I can increase pressure and increase the speed of the buffing. So once the drawing is established and the etch has been applied, we're ready to print. So I'm gonna remove the etched layer and replace this drawing with ink. So I'm just gonna use a solvent to take out the material. So we're using Estisol, which doesn't have the same type of vapors that mineral spirits do, so the air quality is a little bit gentler in here. And we're just going to remove the drawing before we print onto paper. Okay, so now that the drawing material is removed, we're going to prime the image with some asphaltum. And that'll just help the ink stick to the image area that we're trying to print. Try to use as little of this as possible. So you're going to rub this into the drawing. And then remove the excess. So now we're ready to roll this up in ink. So I had mentioned earlier that the process is predicated on the principle that water and grease repel each other. So I'm just going to introduce water into the equation. And there's actually a gum stencil protecting our white areas, what will be the non-image areas of the drawing. And so anything oil-based will come off of the surface at that point. So now I'm just left with the brown asphaltum that is going to prime the drawing. And then I'll introduce ink. So we're just going to charge the roller with black ink. This is called a brayer. So it's important that areas of the limestone that are not primed with asphaltum are damp, because that moisture is going to repel the oil-based ink. So I have to sponge this with moisture before going over it with the roller each time. So if this was dry, the ink from the roller would just stick to the surface of the stone. So the limestone is very porous, so it absorbs the moisture. and holds on to it. And then where the asphaltum has primed the drawing, it repels the water, so the ink sticks to those areas. Okay, so once this is fully inked up, we'll make our first proof and see how the image transfers. Okay, so I'll just lay the paper down. So this is just newsprint. This is called a tympan. Now once the press is in position, I can't see my stone because the tympan is over top, but I've marked the press bed. I'll engage the pressure. And then we'll run the print through the press. Okay, so there's our drawing. So from here, this is our very first proof. We could go back and work into the stone by making deletions. We could add drawing if necessary. We can make different choices based on how this proof results, or we could just print our addition from here. So the principles are fairly succinct, but depending on this, specifically what kind of an image you want, it can expand and become very, very complex. So we're just going to print this a few times, see if we can maintain some consistency across the printing. It'll probably get a little bit darker, but we don't want it to get too much darker than this. Okay. This is a piece of mulberry. So just see how it. Okay, so it's a little bit more delicate on the mulberry, so we might need to add a little bit more ink to compensate for that. Okay, so we could go a little bit darker, but we're kind of in the ballpark. Okay, so once we're finished printing, we're going to close the stone down. So I'm going to roll it up full with ink as though I was to print it again, except instead of printing it, I'm going to preserve it for storage. So in case I wanted to print this again, it would be available. I would still be able to reproduce the same image with the same nuances. Okay, so the stone is fully inked up. So I'm going to apply rosin and talc along with some gum arabic. So the rosin and the talc helps to stabilize the image and also allow the solution to penetrate down into the pores of the limestone. So I'm just drawing the stone. Apply the rosin. Talc. Okay, so again, that'll help break the surface tension and pull the gum arabic solution down into the pores of the limestone. So just like the ink sort of protects our image area and maintains the grease content in the image areas, the gum arabic is going to protect our non-image areas from contamination. So the gum arabic is a water-soluble solution, and of course the ink dissolves in oil-based solvents, and so we're protecting those and separating those two sensibilities, the water-loving and the oil-loving or grease-loving areas of the stone. I'll just add my gum arabic. So you want to be careful during this part not to smear the drawing. So I'll start with very light pressure and go quite slow, and then as I remove the excess gum arabic, I can start to buff that surface. Okay, so the stone is ready for storage at this point. Hi, so for this portion, which is the at-home part of this, we're gonna do what's called paper lithography. This is a photocopy of our original lithograph, and we're gonna see what kind of a transfer we can get. So I've never done this before, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is roll our ink out so that it's prepared, so that when we have our paper plate ready to be inked up, our palette is already ready to go. It's a little bit more stable than the paper, which dries out more quickly. So we'll go ahead and put the ink out. So for this we'll need a few items. We'll need a photocopy of our drawing. So I just took the original lithograph and photocopied it at the Staples. It needs to be a toner photocopy. It can't be an inkjet copy. I'm gonna use my bone folder because I don't have a press. We're gonna need some gum arabic, some canola oil to clean up the oil-based ink afterwards. We're gonna need some gloves, a bucket of water, a sponge, some type of sponge, a brayer, and some oil-based ink. Okay, so I've already deposited my printing ink, my lithographic ink, onto this piece of plexiglass. And we'll also need a piece of plexiglass to mount our photocopy. Okay, so I'm going to start by adhering my photocopy to my piece of plexiglass. So I want for this to be adhered to this as flat as possible, and I'm going to use a bit of gum arabic to adhere it. So I want to make sure I coat the surface. And then as soon as the photocopy, because this is just regular wood pulp paper, as soon as it comes into contact with moisture, it's going to expand, and then we'll end up with kind of air bubbles, and that'll interfere with the printing. So I'm gonna soak this piece of paper before I try to adhere it to the plate. And then I can just remove the excess paper. I'm just going to blot the excess moisture. And then I'll just add a little bit more gum arabic. So just like in the stone lithography, the principle is that the water fiber, which has absorbed the water, the paper fiber, which has absorbed the water, will reject the oil-based ink, and the toner from the laser jet will, the ink will adhere to that part of it. So I'm just going to introduce a slight amount of moisture. I don't want to get the paper too wet or cause too much friction to it because it's going to want to fall apart. So the ink may stick to the white parts of the paper. That's okay because as we go over it with the sponge, it'll reject the ink from those areas. Okay, so now we'll try and print that. Try and get the paper to lay flat. So I'm just going to use a piece of cardboard as a backing sheet, and then I'll use the pressure of the bone folder to hopefully transfer the ink. Okay, so you can kind of see what's going on there. Just lift a corner and see how that's transferred. Okay, so this is the paper plate that we started with, and then this is our transfer. So it's a little bit more drawerly. It's lost a bit of its photocopy sensibility, but it didn't transfer totally perfectly. So if I was trying to resolve this, I would draw back into it probably with a bit of charcoal, something soft, because this paper is quite delicate. And then try and work up those values. Okay, so once you're finished with your run, we can do a little bit of a cleanup. So realistically, I'm not sure if you're gonna get more than 3 or 4 prints out of this paper plate before it starts to break down. Again, I'm not real experienced in this, so you could see how far you could push it, but just knowing the nature of this bond paper, I feel like it's not gonna last very long. So I can just, once I've printed 2, you might get 3 or 4, and once you're done with that, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this out, and then we can start cleaning up our brayer and our palette. So I'm just gonna peel this off. So at about that point, I can just take this to the kitchen sink and clean it up with soap and water. So these rags can go in the garbage. I'll reuse this plexiglass. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and drawn back into my transfer. If you're the previous in the video, you saw what it looked like directly from the transfer. I've gone back into it with this charcoal pencil. So you can see here, this is the original lithograph that we started with. This was one of the photocopies that we made of this lithograph. This was one of the less successful paper litho transfers, and then this was the more successful paper litho transfer, which I drew back into. But because this technique is a little bit, it's pretty lo-fi, I would usually probably think about either printing subsequent layers over top of it, or like in this case, drawing back into it. So yeah, I know from a purist perspective, you're not really supposed to draw back into prints, but I think it can be interesting. I can make up all types of background and negative space and produce kind of a suite of drawings that derive from that one core sort of rooster ghost, so to speak. So if you have a in monoprint or monotype, you'll often end up with a ghost and then work back into it. So I think that there's some possibilities there. So yeah, drawing is drawing. So paper lithography, I made a few today. I've never done it before today. It worked out okay. I think that you have to be willing to respond to whatever kind of unpredictable things happen.